This is Carolina Business Review. Major support provided by Colonial Life, providing benefits to employees to help them protect their families, their finances, and their futures. High Point University, the premier life skills university focused on preparing students for the world as it is going to be. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
The contemporary American author and activist Tom Atlee once wrote, and I quote, "Things are getting better and better, worse and worse, faster and faster, simultaneously." Wow. That may not be the best way to start this dialogue, but it does highlight the velocity of change and how much activity truly is unfolding, especially here in the Carolinas. I'm Chris William. Thank you for supporting this, and welcome to the most widely watched and the longest running program on Carolina business, policy, and public affairs in a moment. And from time to time, we like to convene this group, a panel of insiders, we call it, to help us see our way forward. And we will do that again. So stay with us because we start right now.
Major funding also by Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, an independent licensee of the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association, and Martin Marietta, a leading provider of natural resource-based building materials, providing the foundation on which our communities improve and grow. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Christopher Chung from the Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina, Antjuan Seawright of Blueprint Strategy, Donald Thompson from the Diversity Movement, and Sara Fawcett from the United Way of the Midlands.
Hello, welcome again. Brace yourselves. It's an election year. So, Antjuan, I've got to go to you first on this. This is an election year, both important in South Carolina and election year in North Carolina, and certainly presidential politics. Is this going to be like a riot at Carowinds?
Chris, I like to believe every day is election day. So I don't think this year is any different than any day. But I'll say this, look, I think bipartisanship is the only pathway forward at the state level and the national level. I always reference D.C. as dysfunctional city. And unfortunately, that's starting to come downstream into the state legislative level. But I think we can turn the corner in the Carolinas if we root our decision-making back to bipartisanship, focusing on bread and butter issues, quality of life issues, education, healthcare, infrastructure, the environment, the things that keep people up at night, but the things that will make people sleep better if their problems are solved. And because of all the work that's been done in Washington, D.C., the Carolinas have benefited handsomely. So I think figuring out how we package those things up, get it to the American people, rural, urban, and suburban North Carolina, South Carolina, I think we can turn the corner and send the nation a message that the Carolinas operate independently and a little different.
Drafting off of what Antjuan just said, and I'm looking at you, Sara. If all politics are local, and this year is going to be important, both states have key elections, key elections coming up. Legislatively, what do you want to see?
So in South Carolina, some of the things that I'd like to see, to play off what Antjuan was saying, when you can take some concerns off the table, like the supplemental EBT that would provide that extra nutritional funding for kids over the summer. I think that would be a great thing to do. I think, again, takes one more thing off the table that you've got to think about. Certainly, we really want to see teacher pay continue to increase. I like the governor's plan to step it up over the next couple of years, and I think taking it from 42.5 to 45 this year should be doable. I hope, with an ultimate target of 50, and would just like to continue to see everything that we can do in terms of workforce development, whether that be increase the scholarship dollars available at our technical colleges, making sure that they've got the equipment and the training programs available for the kind of growth that we're seeing in South Carolina.
Yeah, Chris, North Carolina's coming off a banner year, not just economic development-wise, thanks in large part to you and your team, but the idea that 23 was great. I mean, will this momentum continue? And legislatively, what do you think is going to be important?
Well, first off, Happy New Year to everybody. I think we're still deep enough in January where I think that's okay. It is great to be back. For us, Yeah, 23 was great. I think from a numbers standpoint, we certainly had some good wins. I think we're also celebrating 2 years in a row being CNBC's top state for business. And that kind of accolade, as you can imagine, it's priceless in our business. We like to joke a little bit with our South Carolina colleagues that they improved more between 22 and 23. They moved from 36th to 27th. We were not able to improve on our #1 finish in 2022. So alas, we stayed at #1 in 2023. I think from a legislative or a national standpoint, one thing that we're looking at, and I think South Carolina is looking at this too, so many of the deals that we've been able to chase and successfully land in the Carolinas have been the result of federal legislation, specifically the Inflation Reduction Act. That has been spurring a lot of corporate investment in sectors like vehicle electrification, EV battery production, and things like renewable power products, so solar panels, wind turbines, that sort of thing. We have a very stark choice in terms of the federal election. I think the Biden agenda and Trump agenda will be very different on things like the Inflation Reduction Act. So as we get deeper into 2024, I don't think we'll be surprised to see the pace of activity slow down as companies await to see which policy regime ends up winning on the ballot in November. Because if the IRA is something that Biden doubles down on in his second term, or if it's something that Trump repeals in his second term, who knows what that does to this kind of corporate investment that both North and South Carolina have been successfully competing for the past couple of years. So that's the big question mark for us, even more so than any state legislation that we're monitoring.
Okay, quickly, because I know you have...
And look, whether you agree with Biden or not, he's done a lot. There's not a constituency in the country that has not benefited, or a region of the country. The Carolinas, I think, have benefited more. And the threat in every election is who's going to be for it and who's going to get it. The Carolinas have done good, but that can easily change with one election. I think that's what voters have to think about as they begin to cast their vote.
Donald, do the cultural priorities kind of take a backseat or get eclipsed by what's going on in presidential politics?
In many ways they do in the media narrative perspective. But then when you look at the corporation's need and requirement to have a high quality workforce, it comes back to the business reality that if you don't take care of people, both inside the organization, but also in the economic environment they're going to move into, you do not have a strategic advantage long term. And so there's that media narrative that's very, very loud, but the CEOs have to think about that personalized work experience for their employees in order to compete and win.
You know, you all probably know this or feel it, but certainly know it. And I know, Chris, you know this, but I want to highlight something. I want to ask you a question off the back of this. You know, we all talk about the success of the Carolinas. You know, both states have a substantial surplus in budgets for several years now. The wind's at our back, the growth is happening, and Bloomberg reported last year, and it was during the summer, and I think in large part this was missed by a lot of people, but this is an important stake in the ground, and I want to read part of this, and this is from Bloomberg. For the first time since the government started tracking this, 6 southern states, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, Florida, and Texas, are contributing more to the nation's gross domestic product than the Northeast. Now, we all have always said it's the New South, we know we're doing better, et cetera, but Bloomberg called it the $100 billion wealth migration, tilting the U.S. economy's center of gravity south. This is big, and now the data proves it, but we're kind of like the dog that caught the car. Now what? Because we've got expensive housing, we've got transportation issues, et cetera, et cetera. How do we make sure we don't turn into a Northeast or a California?
Well, I think investments in managing that growth, that's going to be the biggest policy question confronting elected officials in either North or South Carolina, right? I mean, but at the end of the day, you'd rather have to contend with problems of growth than problems of stagnation or shrinkage. That's true of any economy, any community, anywhere. But it comes down to investing in things like making sure schools aren't overcrowded, to make sure traffic congestion isn't so terrible that it erodes quality of life, to make sure that infrastructure, education, housing, all of these things have to keep pace with that population flow that we're seeing coming into both Carolinas.
Sarah, can we do that?
I think that we can. I think, speaking strictly from the South Carolina perspective, you know, South Carolina in the June 30th semi-annual census report, South Carolina had the fastest rate of growth of any other state in the country, which was really, to me, being in South Carolina now for almost 20 years, was amazing. I mean, it's really energizing for me as a South Carolinian. Having said that, I am hearing my state understanding that we have to have that focus on infrastructure. We have hundreds of bridges in the state that are 80 and 90 years old, and I think the state I say that in the sense that I think our state is paying attention to that and is beginning to plan for that. Road expansion, all of those kinds of basic infrastructure things. I think the governor also is focused on energy. We're talking about not just rate of growth of population, but the types of industries that are coming into South Carolina and into North Carolina as well, and having the power production that we need to have in South Carolina, and making sure that we've got to focus on that too.
Are you optimistic about being able to keep up with this?
I'm very optimistic, and I would want to add another extension point. I was very fortunate, had breakfast the other day with a venture capitalist with a specific support function for the Southeast. And so one of the things that I do is when I keep my ear to folks that are moving and working with money. Money follows opportunity, money follows quality infrastructure, money follows governments that have predictable outcomes, right? Not chaos. And so what we found in the Southeast, that cost of living, that improvement in infrastructure, long way to go, but very, very important. Dollars are starting to flow our way, and people are starting to specifically target growth right within our area from a lot of different perspectives.
But Chris, nobody retires and moves up north. An old adage from Antjuan.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And it's true, but the key is how we spread the growth out. In South Carolina, we can't pivot the growth to only the suburban urban areas. If not, rural South Carolina or the rural Carolinas will continue to suffer. And so we've got to figure out how to spread the wealth, spread the gain, continue to update all of our infrastructure, from housing to roads to bridges to schools, continue to treat these things as investments, not expenses. That means getting away from the partisan idea of cutting the bone or cutting taxes, but continue making investments so we can continue to benefit from the investments, because they are going to continue to come.
If I could jump in there real quick, I mean,
Please.
I think that urban-rural disparity has long been a part of the conversation here in the Carolinas, right? But I think ironically...
Because it's so stark?
Because it is so stark, right? I mean, here in North Carolina, of course, the growth has traditionally in the past couple of decades been concentrated on the Charlotte and Triangle regions, a little bit in the Triad, and then some in Asheville and Wilmington, but the vast majority of the counties in this state have seen population decline. Now, I would say, ironically, in the past few years, you look at the kind of economic development wins that North Carolina has scored, and I think true for South Carolina, big manufacturing companies doing things like EV battery productions or solar panel productions, and those are actually happening in more rural or ex-urban areas. The big office deals, technology companies, headquarters, those have been pretty absent from the economic development deal flow in the past several years. Those traditionally would go into the cities or urban areas. Manufacturing investments, they're not going into Mecklenburg County or to Wake County or to any urban city. They're going into more rural areas where there's more land and it's more conducive for manufacturing. So the fortunes of rural North Carolina, I think in the past few years anyway, have actually taken a bit of a turn for the better relative to where they were pre-pandemic.
No one here is a novice in politics and dynamics and business and economic development. So knowing what you know about human nature, Donald, knowing what you know about human nature, knowing what you know about politics, even if you're not a politico, are you, and I promise this is not a pessimistic, this is a skeptical question. Are you concerned that there is political will to do some of these things that's going to cause probably these extremes to come together to really agree on some of these issues that will face the growth here?
I am a recovering optimist, so it is difficult for me to be pessimistic to the degree that we reward people in politics for good behavior. And so that means on things that matter to all of us, can we come together and actually do some things that are significant? Use an example at the national level, right? There's been a lot of scream about border security and different things of that nature, right? Well, there's a deal on the table. Do we actually do a bipartisan deal that helps secure the border or not? And so what I think in politics is there's so much media chasing for attention that I actually don't think our politicians work as hard as they should to do what's right for us by the time and effort and money we spend on them.
Yeah, the last question on the theme here, and I'm going to give it to you. Do you agree with that?
Partly. I think we have to get back to a place of yelling in the places we agree and whispering in the places we disagree. When it comes to things like economic development, used to be at one point in time education, the environment, you find people want to work across the aisle to deliver on those things. I think we have to ground ourselves in those things. But both in South Carolina and North Carolina, the key to doing anything is bipartisanship, but just by the way of the dynamic of the state legislature. So I think when it comes to economic development, it's not whether it's bipartisanship or not, it's like what region of the Carolinas benefit from some of the things that need to be done.
Employment, finding talent. I mean, for years, that's what economic developers has said is one of the bigger things. And I want to ask you a question so much about that. Chris, would you expect that immigration could solve this, and would you expect that there could be some immigration agreement or policy that could go to this filling the gap for talent?
Well, that's a great segue to what both Donald and Antjuan just said. I think if you look at the labor shortage that employers have been facing for the better part of the past several years, nobody expects those challenges to go away anytime soon because they are resulting from baby boomers exiting the workforce. They are resulting from lower than traditional rates of immigration, and they're resulting from fundamental demographic shifts like people waiting longer to have children and having fewer children when they do. The same trajectory every developed economy has gone through over the history of time. We are seeing that play out in the United States, and in the foreseeable future, that's going to mean in a tight labor market. So what are those things we can control? Can't really force people to have kids sooner or have more kids, right? We're not China. We're not going to dictate that kind of policy. Immigration is one rational area where we can supplement the U.S. workforce with people who have the skills necessary to come into the country legally and add to our economy. And I think most people of both political persuasions are in agreement that that has to be part of the solution. You've got fringes on both sides, both parties, who say either no immigration at all or let's just have an open border. I don't think that's where the majority of Americans are. I think most Americans recognize the value of immigrants. My parents immigrated from Taiwan 50 years ago. They came in legally. I think that's got to be part of the solution to address workforce challenges in the foreseeable future, and it's going to take a bipartisan solution.
Anyone see that happening? You think there's going to be movement on it?
I do.
I think there has to be movement on it.
Yeah.
I really do. I mean, we can't, it's not tenable as it is today.
That's right.
We do have an immigration system, and I go back to my HR days when we would have, H-1B visa folks working at the various companies that I was at. We've got an immigration system that has pieces that were designed to work together. And just through, misallocation of resources, that system broke.
Yeah. Last word on it.
It's not a matter of if, it's when and how. I think immigration has been an issue in this country for a very long time. It will always be an issue, but I think how we fix it moving forward, bit by bit, you're not going to fix it all at one time, will determine how well we do going forward as a country. But I do think we'll get a short-term deal to satisfy both parties' hunger and thirst, and then we will continue taking stabs at it or jabs at it, depending on how you frame it, to eventually get to a solution to embrace immigrants, because we're going to need them to fulfill the needs of the future.
So 2023 was the year of the generative AI and the AI dialogue that just broke out into the public dialogue. It's not new, of course. Donald, do you think it's going to gather more momentum? Will this be another magnitude of that AI discussion?
Momentum, and I would use the phrase tsunami. Right? It's going to continue to develop because AI is going to become a part of everything we do, whether or not we understand it. Everything is very simple. If you're writing a phrase in a Word product or a document, and it helps you finish the sentence. If you think about something learning your voice, right, and being able to create additional copies. If you think about Hollywood and entertainment, one of the huge reasons for the strike in Hollywood is because there was really no structure for how to understand and deal with artificial intelligence and being able to replicate somebody's name, image, and likeness, right, with or without their consent. What I would say on AI is a lot of people are afraid of it. It's going to take jobs, different things. I think about technology as something that's just transformational. So I encourage people to understand the skills development to be a part of the AI-driven economy versus the energy on the fear of what it will do to you.
Like anything, it's going to impact communities of color more than any other community.
In what way?
Whether it's the job front, whether it's how we conduct ourselves going forward, whether it's how we fix things like healthcare solutions and how we deal with education, the rural, urban. I think that's going to be a thing to deal with. But I also think that the government has to play an early role in having some sort of checks and balances on it. And if that does not happen in a bipartisan way, I think the road ahead will be scary as hell.
We did have the German ambassador here, and the question came up about the EU and the global AI standards, and they seem to be further ahead than the United States. There's much more angst and wringing of hands in the United States. But Sarah, I want to come back to this idea, and this is really a question for anyone here, and that is, it seems like there's fear about AI, as you said, but fear, and I wonder how much it is because if AI starts completing our sentences, when do we stop thinking as much? When do we stop being creative as much? And I know it's also meant to be a creative tool, but it can have the opposite effect.
Well, and to be really honest, the place where I'm most concerned about it is in education. In my industry, it can definitely help. When you're talking about grant writing, for example, you know, AI can absolutely help that grant writer come up with more information than they otherwise would be able to gather on their own, and at least put together an idea. What I don't want is that grant writer to just let the AI, let ChatGPT or whoever write the grant application.
Because of the integrity of some of the data?
Yeah, well, just because I still want that independent human lens looking at the information first before it goes out. But that's just me. I mean, I wish I was quite the optimist that you are, Donald, and I definitely do not want my kids writing term papers via
Your
AI.
kids, you mean?
Like my kids.
What I would say to jump in on that is the AI can get you 70% of the way there. Let's just talk about content or marketing content or a speech for a politician, but it doesn't humanize it for you. And so if you think that AI is going to be a complete work product that you can deliver to the world, you will lose strategically to the organizations that use AI as a research engine and use talented humans to now craft a very special and targeted narrative story. Because you can tell that difference. You can tell when somebody is robotic when they see one another. But if we've seen one another again and we're genuinely glad to be together, then there is a natural smile to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like any technology. If it's augmented, if it's applied properly, it's going to make us all more productive, and it's going to allow us to develop skills that we didn't have before, and not spend time on the things that were time-intensive or labor-intensive that can now be offloaded to an AI technology. But I think there's a great quote about how society traditionally has always overestimated the speed with which technology changes things, but underestimates the scope and degree to which it will change things. So we're so early on in what this AI looks like, but I think one thing we can all say is it's going to be extremely pervasive through all elements of the economy, and what that ends up looking like, it's going to be a fascinating thing to see over the next couple of decades.
Chris was smiling. He's probably going to steal your quote like he's still mine.
That sounds good.
But Chris, the danger in AI is the misinformation and disinformation piece. Because we know we have outside actors outside of this country who really lean in when big events happen, and AI can be a tool that can be used as a weapon of mass destruction if we're not careful to really have impact on the American spirit. Forget about the people, but the American spirit, and that's one of my fears about AI.
I'll talk back real quick to something economic development related. Whatever it ends up being applied for, the rise of AI is definitely driving an economic development need for more data centers. These big, massive facilities filled with high-powered computers that gobble up a tremendous amount of power and land. And that is starting to get to be a challenging thing, because you look at all the manufacturing investment that's come online in the U.S. in the past several years, semiconductors, EV battery plants, that puts a huge strain on the power system.
The Apple announcement that you were out in front of.
Yeah, add to that all the data centers that are coming online to meet the needs of AI, and at a certain point, our utility infrastructure as a country, it cannot keep pace with this demand, and it's going to require trillions of dollars of investments probably by utility companies to meet this rising power demand. And that's something that economic development is certainly watching as a trend in the industry.
You're in the center of that up in RTP. I mean, is that how you see it?
One of the things I would extend to it is slightly different. I want to come back to the point of AI in education and cutting the corners. I think any technology that's overused limits our ability to learn how to think and process information and organize our thoughts. And I do think that's a very strong risk, both educationally, but also in business as we're looking to grow future leaders to drive our economy. I think very firmly that we've got to figure out what that natural blend is between technology and then the adoption of that technology. And I think therein is the opportunity. I think if North Carolina and South Carolina, the Carolinas, think about the educational investment of how to deploy AI effectively, now you can be on offense while, and this is a really important point that I appreciate, defending against the negative. If you have bias built into algorithms that drive AI decision making in loan approval, right, in who gets to what school and zoning, now all of a sudden you can have negative actors that can wash their hands of the outcome because they've pre-programmed in
But that won't
a
be
negative
sustainable,
bias.
Donald. Don't you think someone would highlight the fact that, you know, there's a nefarious part of this AI that's Or am I being
There's some
Pollyannish?
people,
Yeah, I think a little bit on
there's
that
some
one.
people who benefit from
Think
that.
so? I thought you were optimistic.
Yeah, I am, but a little bit on that one, because the control mechanisms, if you think about technology being a white male-dominated field at its engineering level, it's not even the nefarious actors. It's the actor that doesn't even understand their bias.
That's right.
Right, that creeps into these systems. So we really have to be mindful of that intellectual technology infrastructure, but also training people from the bottom up to recognize their bias. If I have a bias, it doesn't mean I'm a racist. It means I have biases, and I need to make sure it doesn't creep into my work product.
60 seconds left on this. So I guess, Antjuan, we're going to end with you, literally 30 seconds. So would you expect AI to be a force for good in the near term?
We hope, but we don't know. You can't define the unknown. What I hope is that we have a system of checks and balances wherever we can in order to manicure it for good. And there's always going to be bad, but if we can control the bad and shape the good, I do feel optimistic that AI will play a tremendous role.
Thank you. Sorry to cut you off. Thank you all for coming. And this is,
Thank you for having
has
us.
always been great. Antjuan, welcome to the group. Susie Shannon from South Carolina might not be happy about that, but we'll get her back as well. But thanks for stepping in at the last minute. Great to see you all.
Great to be here.
Until next week, I'm Chris William. Have a nice weekend. Good night.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Martin Marietta, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, Sunoco, High Point University, Colonial Life, and by viewers like you. Thank you. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.